Everybody, welcome to Fit Tip Tuesday. Today I want to answer just one more question about fitting a collared shirt. I got a question from a subscriber, and I'm doing this during Fit Tip Tuesday because during subscriber Q&A tomorrow, I want to really branch off onto a new topic. And I figure because I'm wrapping up the shirt topic, I figured I might as well just talk about that now, and then tomorrow we'll be doing some subscriber Q&A that does not have anything to do with shirts. So the question was, if you have to add to the length of your shoulder pieces at the neckline side of your shoulder, do you also have to adjust your collar pieces? Now, in the process of working with my own shirt, I did not have to do that to my pattern, so it didn't come up. I did have to lower my back neckline because it was riding too high on my neck, but that didn't change the length of the neckline or the need to change the collar. So what I want to do here is I made a copy of my pattern, and I just made a copy of just the shoulder pieces and the neckline so they're small, and I can show you what we're talking about here. And I also made half pieces of my original collar and collar stand so I can show you how to adjust those pieces if you adjust the shoulder at the neckline. So let me just start in the back here. So you can see I actually drew in all of my seam allowances. You know, I'm famous for drawing them in after I've already started the video, so I prepped this in advance so we have everything drawn. And the reason why I drew the seam allowances is because you need to take those into consideration when you're deciding if the collar stand is still going to match the length of the collar, because the seam allowances are not part of the measurement when you compare them to the collar stand. So this is my center back seam. I happen to have a 3/4 inch center back seam and shoulder seam for fitting on this pattern. So you can see I've got my 3/4 mark there, and then I have a 1/2 inch on the neckline. So what ends up happening is, let's say you try your shirt on, or you're fitting your shirt and it's peeking up at the base of your neck. So the shirt is not sitting on your shoulder, it's peeking up. And I'll put a link to a video in the description below that shows what I'm talking about, meaning the shirt's not hanging from your shoulder, it's not laying on your shoulder, and it's actually lifting up at the intersection of the neckline and shoulder seam here. When that happens, you have to reduce the slope of the shoulder, or reduce the length front to back on your pieces, so your shoulder can, or the shoulder seam and the shoulder of your garment can sit on your shoulder. So what you want to do is you're going to want to pinch that out and decide how much you need to remove. Now be careful when you're doing that, because it may be that you need to remove it more from the front or back. It might not be like a like adjustment front to back. Because remember, the back shoulder is reaching around your neckline and coming up to the shoulder seam. The front shoulder is just coming up to meet it. So the front shoulder really isn't wrapping around your neck as much, because the neckline is a little bit more open in the front. I mean, it still reaches up around your neck, but it's not as, it's just longer. It's a longer distance from back to the front. So here's my back. Let's say, for example, we had to shorten the shoulder a 1/2 inch to get it to lay. And in this case, let's just say I could pinch it evenly, and if I took a 1/2 inch off of the shoulder in the front and the back, that got it to lay nicely. So just unsew it and repin it until you get it to settle nice and straight on the center of your shoulder. That's what's going to tell you how much you need to remove from each shoulder seam at the neckline edge. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I've got these seam allowances marked. But you don't need to worry about those when you're adjusting your pattern. And what I mean by that is, if I have to remove a 1/2 inch, and I'll just mark it right here. So right here we have to get rid of a 1/2 inch here. And we're going to go back to the original here, so we're not going to make a change here. Then all I have to do is measure down a 1/2 inch like this, and then blend that back to 0 at the armhole edge. Okay, so we're going to get rid of all of this, and then let's say it worked out that the front was exactly the same, meaning in this case, just to keep it simple, I also had to remove a 1/2 inch in the front. Now it may be that you don't. Okay, so I don't want you to think that just pinching equal amount is going to fix every issue. Like I said, unpin it, pin it back together, or unsew it, pin it back together, and see what it is that you need to remove. So I don't know, let's say in the front I only needed to remove a 1/4, just to make it different. All right, so here we go. I'm just going to mark that. So you can see now I'm reducing the slope because I'm reducing the angle of both of the shoulder edges. When I go to pin this together, it'll have a flatter slope. And a lot of times, if you have straight shoulders and you don't have a sloping shoulder, and your armhole is fitting right, you have to lower this here to get that to fit. So if I'm going to get rid of those two things, that means I have a -1/4 here, and I have a -1/2 over here, and I'm just going to turn them like this so you can see. Okay, so here is our adjusted shoulders, and actually I might as well just cut it off. We lost the 1/2 inch here. I'm just going to cut it. Okay. And I'll cut this one off as well. All right, and then whenever you adjust your shoulders like this, the first thing you want to do is just make sure that when you put them back together, you have a smooth transition still. So I'm going to go ahead and redraw my seam allowance, because remember, the seam allowance is in there. We removed some fabric to lower that part of the shoulder near the neckline, but the shoulder seam allowance was still there, so I'm just going to redraw it. Okay, so now it's in orange. So you can see what's happened is we have shortened the neckline by 3/4 of an inch on each side, right? Because we cut off a 1/2 inch here, and we cut off a 1/4 inch over here, right? So that means the collar and collar stand need to be 3/4 of an inch shorter on both sides. So that's actually 1.5 inches. That's a significant amount. So the first thing I'm going to do here, though, is I'm going to take my front and I'm going to line it up like this. And I want to just make sure, after trimming that off, and actually I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this one back on itself, and then I'm going to align it up with the other seam allowance just so we can see the shape. Now we can see that that shape still looks okay. The neckline is starting to look slightly pinched, so you may want to just go in and smooth this out just a little bit like this. So fill in that little divot there, because you don't want any pointy things at the seams, because it will show and it will pull at your collar. So just smooth that out. Here I have a pretty good transition still, so I'm not going to worry about that. but I am going to fill in that little dip right there. So that's the first thing I'm going to worry about. Okay. Then the next thing is, if your shirt has a separate button placket, you have to remember to include that on your center front when you're walking your pattern pieces, because the collar stand goes all the way across the top of the button placket. I'm going to grab my button placket, and I'm just going to fold the top edge, and I'm going to pin it to the front of my sample here, and I'm lining up my seam allowances like this. So you can see the front neckline goes all the way to the outer edge of the button placket. Okay, so you have to remember to add that in, otherwise you won't be walking your collar stand, you know, you won't get an accurate measurement there. All right, let me just cut that out of the way. All right, so now, after we've made our adjustments, try your shirt back on, make sure everything is sitting on your shoulders properly. Then you're going to go back and you're going to check your collar stand. Now remember, you're not going to walk the collar around the neckline. The collar does not get sewn to the neckline. The collar stand does. So what I'm going to do is I am going to get my copies. Here's what I'm going to do. I know I made the change at my shoulder seam, right? I'm going to line up my collar so that the edge right here Okay, that's the very tip of my collar. That's what has to get lined up with the very outer corner of my button placket. I'm going to start there. And I'm just going to walk it around, and I'm going to use my seam ripper here to hold it. So I'm starting on this very edge, making sure that's lined up. And again, I'm just going to walk on the seam allowance all the way to my shoulder seam, like this. When I get to my actual shoulder seam, I'm going to mark front. Okay, so that's where my the front shoulder seam is. Now, if this collar stand fit perfectly, the back would meet up with that. Let's see what the back does. Move that out of the way. Here's my back. And in the back, I'm going to start at the center back. And notice what I'm doing here. I'm lining up the center back with the seam allowance, because there's no seam allowance here, there's a seam allowance here. So literally, I'm just going to line that up, and then I'm going to walk this piece right around, and I'm going to walk it, and I'm going to mark the position of my back shoulder, back. Okay, and what you can see here is I have space between my front and my back. So that means the back shoulder from the center back to the shoulder seam is here, and from my center front, or from the end of my button placket, which is a little bit over from center front, my shoulder seam is here. So what does that mean? That means I have to get rid of this extra fabric, or extra paper. So you can see here, if I draw myself a line straight down, and then I'm going to draw a line straight down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm literally going to cut one, and I'm going to tape it to the other line that I drew, and now my collar stand is adjusted. That's how you shorten your collar stand. And then to get the collar to agree, you're basically going to do the same thing. Now, if you're sure you traced everything properly, you can just cut off a like amount from your collar as well, but I like to verify. So I'm literally going to walk my collar, and when I walk the collar onto the collar stand, again, it's going to be this lower edge that we're walking. So let me just put the seam allowance there. So I'm literally going to start center back, and I'm just going to walk my collar, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark where the shoulder seam is now located on my collar stand. So it's right there, so that's where the shoulder is on my collar stand. And then I'm going to come over here to where this orange dot is, where my collar stops at the top of the collar stand. So I'm going to line that right up with this little corner here, which is right at the intersection of those two seams, and I'm going to walk that and again I'm just going to walk it right down, and you can see I do have a similar amount that I need to remove from the collar itself. Now you may be wondering why I started center back to shoulder and then center front to shoulder, because if your collar has a shape, you don't want to just chop it off at the end. You want to sort of chop it off where you made the adjustment. In case you've got a curve to your collar, it'll just agree better. So again, I'm going to just make myself my two lines. And I will cut one and slide that over, and then I've adjusted both my collar and collar stand. I'll cut that one. I'll just slide it over like this. And now I've adjusted both pieces. All right. Now, let me show you one situation where you could be adjusting the shoulder at the neckline and you wouldn't need to adjust your collar pieces. So let's say I had to, let's say we had to remove a 1/4 inch from the back, but we had to add a 1/4 inch to the front to get the seam on your shoulder to sit properly. It's hanging properly, but the shoulder seam is not straight. We needed to push it back a little bit. To push it back, you would trim off the back and add to the front. Now, if it was too far backwards, you would add to the back and remove the front. But if you're making like opposite adjustments to your length of your shoulder, you don't need to adjust your collar and collar stand, because the length is the same. The thing that's different is you're going to have to move your notch into position where your shoulder seam is. So just quickly, I can just show you here. So I'll use a different color so it's not confusing. But let's say in the back, let's say we had to move the shoulder seam back a little bit. We're going to shorten or remove the extra length in the back. So let's just say it was a 1/4, like this. So now I'm going to go to 0 this way. Okay, so I'm going to cut that off, that -1/4 there. Okay. And I'll just cut it off. All right, and then when I go to my front, I am just going to add a little paper. You know, we're just going to make a little adjustment here. Okay, I'm just going to tape this. All right, so I removed a 1/4 from the back. We're going to add a 1/4 to the front, like this. Okay, so we plussed 1/4 here. Whoops. All right, so that means our net length is the same because we trimmed off the same amount we added. So if you needed to just make an adjustment to shift the position of your shoulder seam on top of your shoulder, you're not changing the length of your neckline. So you do not need to change the length or adjust the length of your collar and collar stand. So that's what this adjustment would look like. All right, so I hope that will help. I know at least one of you needed that answer, so I hope this is helpful. Sometimes it's hard when you're working on a garment that has a lot of pieces that go together, and if you change one thing, you have to then remember to go and change the things that sew to it. So when you're working with a shirt with a collar, you need to make sure if you do any adjustments to the length of your neckline, then you need to also adjust your collar. So I hope that helps. If you have any questions about how to adjust your collar and collar stand based on how you're adjusting your shoulder, please let me know and I will help you. Have a very, very nice rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow live at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time for subscriber Q&A, and we will have some sort of fun topic. I have a bunch of different things I can work with, so I'm going to pick something fun, and I will see you tomorrow. Thank you guys for watching, and have a lovely rest of your day.